I struggled and wriggled around. With some difficulty I managed to get onto my feet and stand up in the swaying basket. The man in the other pannier looked round at me quite amiably. "Whoa there!" he said to the great horse, and reined in. He unslung a leather bottle from his shoulder and swung it across to me on the strap. I uncorked it, drank gratefully, and swung it back to him. We went on. I was able to see our surroundings now. It was broken country, no longer thick forest, though well wooded, and even a first look at it assured me that my father had been right about normality being mocked in these parts. I could scarcely identify a single tree with certainty. There were familiar trunks supporting the wrong shape of tree, familiar types of branches growing out of the wrong kind of bark, and bearing the wrong kind of leaves. For a while our view to the left was cut off by a fantastically woven fence of immense bramble trunks with spines as big as shovels. In another place a stretch of ground looked like a dried-out riverbed full of large boulders, but the boulders turned out to be globular fungi, set as close together as they could grow. There were trees with trunks too soft to stand upright, so that they looped over and grew along the ground. Here and there were patches of miniature trees, shrunk and gnarled, and looking centuries old. I glanced surreptitiously again at the man in the other pannier. There didn't seem to be anything wrong with him, except that he looked very dirty, as were his ragged clothes and crumpled hat. He caught my eye on him. "Never been in the fringes before, boy?" he asked. "No," I told him. "Is it all like this?" He grinned and shook his head. "None of it's like any other part. That's why the fringes is the fringes. Pretty near nothing grows true to stock here, yet." "Yet?" I repeated. "Sure. It'll settle down, though, in time. Wild country was fringes once, but it's steadier now. Likely the parts you come from were wild country once, but they've settled down more. God's little game of patience, I reckon it is, but he certainly takes—" "God?" I said doubtfully. "They've always taught us that it's the devil that rules in the fringes." He shook his head. "That's what they tell you over there. 'Tisn't so, boy. It's your parts where the old devil's hanging on and looking after his own. Arrogant they are, the true image and all that. Want to be like the old people. Tribulation hasn't taught 'em a thing. The old people thought they were the tops, too. Had ideals, they did. Knew just how the world ought to be run. All they had to do was get it fixed up comfortable and keep it that way. Then everybody'd be fine on account of their ideas being a lot more civilized than God's." He shook his head. "Didn't work out, boy. Couldn't work out. They weren't God's last word like they thought. God doesn't have any last word. If he did, he'd be dead. But he isn't dead, and he changes and grows like everything else that's alive. So when they were doing their best to get everything fixed and tidy on some kind of eternal lines they'd thought up for themselves, he sent along tribulation to bust it up and remind them that life is change. He saw it wasn't going to come out the way things lay, so he shuffled the pack to see if it wouldn't give a better break next time." He paused to consider that a moment, and went on. "Maybe he didn't shuffle quite enough. The same sequences seem to have got kind of stuck together some places. Parts where you come from, for instance. There they are, still on the same line, still reckoning they're the last word, still trying their damnedest to stay as they are and fix up just the same state of affairs that brought tribulation last time. One day he's going to get pretty tired of the way they can't learn a lesson and start showing them another trick or two." "Oh," I said vaguely, but safely. It was odd, I felt, how many people seemed to have positive, if conflicting, information upon God's views. The man did not seem altogether satisfied that he had got his point home. He waved his hand at the deviational landscape about us, and I suddenly noticed his own irregularity. The right hand lacked the first 3 fingers. "Some day," he proclaimed, "something is going to steady down out of all this. It'll be new, and new kinds of plants mean new creatures. Tribulation was a shake-up to give us a new start." But where they can make the stock breed true, they destroy deviations, I pointed out.
They try to. They think they do, he agreed. They're pig-headedly determined to keep the old people's standards. But do they? Can they? How do they know that their crops and their fruit and their vegetables are just the same? Aren't there disputes? And doesn't it nearly always turn out that the breed with a higher yield is accepted in the end? Aren't cattle crossbred to get hardiness or milk yield or meat? Sure, they can wipe out the obvious deviations, but are you sure that the old people would recognize any of the present breeds at all? I'm not, by any means. You can't stop it, you see. You can be obstructive and destructive, and you can slow it all up and distort it for your own ends, but somehow it keeps on happening. Just look at these horses.
They're government approved, I told him.
Sure, that's just what I mean, he said.
But if it keeps on anyway, I don't see why there had to be tribulation, I objected.
For other forms it keeps on keeping on, he said, but not for man. Not for kinds like the old people and your people if they can help it. They stamp on any change. They close the way and keep the type fixed because they've got the arrogance to think themselves perfect. As they reckon it, they and only they are in the true image. Very well. Then it follows that if the image is true, they themselves must be God. And being God, they reckon themselves entitled to decree thus far and no farther. That is their great sin. They try to strangle the life out of life. There was an air about the last few sentences, rather out of keeping with the rest, which caused me to suspect I had encountered some kind of creed once more.
So in life, I guess we have the artistic and we have the more prosaic. So I found my book, and I just stumbled across this a minute ago, but it goes along with the little video. There is simultaneously permanence and change in any living being. Hence, there is permanence and change in any concept reflecting the experience of a living man. However, that concepts have their own lives and that they grow can be understood only if the concepts are not separated from the experience to which they give expression. If the concept becomes alienated, that is, separated from the experience to which it refers, it loses its reality and is transformed into an artifact of man's mind. The fiction is thereby created that anyone who uses the concept is referring to the substratum of experience underlying it. Once this happens, and this process of alienation of concepts is the rule rather than the exception, the idea expressing an experience has been transformed into an ideology that usurps the place of the underlying reality within the living human being. History then becomes a history of ideologies rather than the history of concrete, real men who are the producers of their ideas. The foregoing considerations are important if one wants to understand the concept of God. A concept can never adequately express the experience it refers to. It points to it, but it is not it. It is, as the Zen Buddhists say, the finger that points to the moon. It is not the moon. Now what this means is that the words that we use are fingers pointing to the moon, that they are signposts toward experiences we have as human beings, and that when it comes to God, everybody thinks they have the finger that is the right finger. But the moon remains the same, no matter who points, and no matter what opinion they have of their finger, no matter what they call the finger they point with, the moon remains the same. The concept of God in the Old Testament has its own life and evolution corresponding to the evolution of a people within a span of 1,200 years. There is a common element of experience referred to by the concept of God, but there is also a constant change occurring in this experience, and hence in the meaning of the word and the concept. The third phase in the evolution of the concept of God is reached in God's revelation to Moses. Even at this point, however, all anthropomorphic elements have not disappeared. On the contrary, God still speaks. He dwells on a mountain. He will later write the law on the 2 tablets. The anthropomorphic language describing God continues throughout the Bible. What is new is that God reveals himself as the God of history rather than the God of nature. Most importantly, the distinction between God and an idol finds its full expression in the idea of a nameless God. We shall discuss the story of the liberation from Egypt in some detail later. It will suffice here to mention that in the course of this story, God makes repeated concessions to various pleas made by Moses, who states that the pagan Hebrews cannot understand the language of freedom or the idea of a God who reveals himself only as the God of history, without mentioning a name, saying, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Exodus 3:6. But Moses argues that the Hebrews will not believe him. Then Moses said to God, "If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" Exodus 3:13. Moses' objection is well taken. The very essence of an idol is that it has a name. Everything has a name, because it is complete in time and space. For the Hebrews, accustomed to the concept of idolatry, a nameless God of history could not make sense, for a nameless idol is a contradiction in itself. God recognizes this and makes a concession to the understanding of the Hebrews. He gives himself a name and says to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "Say this to the people of Israel, 'I am has sent me to you.'" Exodus 3:14. What does this strange name which God gives himself mean? The Hebrew text says, "Ehyah Asher Ehyah," or "Ehyah has sent me to you." Ehyah is the first person of the imperfect tense of the Hebrew verb to be. We must remember that in Hebrew there is no present tense, but only 2 basic tense forms, perfect and imperfect. The present can be formed by the use of the participle, as in English, "I am writing," but there is no tense corresponding to "I write." All relations of time are expressed by certain secondary alterations to the verb. Fundamentally, an action is experienced as being either perfected or non-perfected. With words denoting actions in the physical world, the perfect necessarily implies the past. If I have perfected writing a letter, my writing is finished. It is in the past. But with activities of a non-physical nature, like knowing, for instance, it is different. If I have perfected my knowledge, it is not necessarily in the past, but the perfect of knowing can, and often does, mean in Hebrew, I know completely, I understand thoroughly. The same holds true of verbs like to love and the like. In considering God's name, the importance of the Ahea lies in the fact that it is the imperfect of the verb to be. It says God is, but his being is not completed like that of a thing, but is a living process of becoming. Only a thing, that is, that which has reached its final form, can have a name. A free translation of God's answer to Moses would be, my name is nameless. Tell them that Nameless has sent you. Only idols have names because they are things. The living God cannot have a name. In the name of Ahea, we find an ironical compromise between God's concession to the ignorance of the people and his insistence that he must be a nameless God. This God who manifests himself in history cannot be represented by any kind of image, neither by an image of sound, that is, a name, nor by an image of stone or wood. This prohibition of any kind of representation of God is clearly expressed in the Ten Commandments, which forbid man to bow down before any graven image, nor any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth below, or that is in the water under the earth. Exodus 24. This command is one of the most fundamental principles of Jewish theology. Though God has been designated by a paradoxical name, YHWH, even this name must not be uttered in vain. It is said in the Ten Commandments. Maimonides, in his commentary, explains that this in vain as meaning to no purpose. The later Jewish tradition and religious practice has made clear what this no purpose means. While observing Jews up to this day never pronounce the YHWH, but say instead Adonai, which means my Lord. They will not even say Adonai except in prayer or in reading the scriptures, but substitute for it Adoshem, the first letter of Adonai, plus the word Shem, which simply means name, whenever they speak about God. Even when writing about God in a foreign language, for instance in English, an observing Jew will write G''D in order not to pronounce God's name in vain. In other words, according to Jewish tradition, the biblical prohibition of any kind of representation of God and against using God's name in vain means that one can talk to God in prayer, in the act of relating oneself to God, but one must not talk about God, lest God be transformed into an idol. Okay, in the video, I am what I am, I sort of made a promise that I would explain why I find humor in that. The book is You Shall Be As Gods by Eric Fromm. I have here my mother, born in 1933, dead in 2015. I have here her Bible. which she gave me many years ago, too many years ago to remember. As you can see, it is the definition of well-thumbed, and in the front of it, on a torn page, on this beginning page, rather tattered, you can see her name, and below it, if found, please call, and then a number. And below that, it has the inscription, which I don't know if I can read, but it says, "Turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the cares of the world seem incomprehensible word, dim when you see his beauty and grace." Maybe, I don't know. Page is all tore up. So whatever she inscribed there, or wherever she got it from, I don't know, because the page is all tore up. And this has been my Bible for too many years to count. Time out of mind. But this is the New American Standard translation. It is considered the most accurate Bible, as far as their most accurate translation from the Aramaic, Hebrew, and Greek that the Bible was written in. So it is very strict about what it says. It makes no concessions at all for changing the text around to something more understandable. So the relevance of me cracking out this here Bible is some of those passages, and there's, all that yellow is there is put by my mom, and the writing over top the beginning of Exodus. Poor woman. But I don't need to think about her life and what it was like right now. When you get to the page in chapter 3 that's referred to in the text I was reading, this is me now. The yellow is her, but the circle part is me. And I don't know if you might even actually be able to read that, depending upon the light. But that is the part where it translated. And God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "Thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you." And then, I forget what these notes are that are in the middle of the thing, this textual notes. But for that one in particular, if it says, the name of God, YHWH, rendered Lord, derived from the verb HAYAH, to be. So it concurs with Dr. Fromm's assessment of it, except for he used the word Ahaya and pronounced it differently. And this says Haya. Yeah. So, what would be the purpose of a man making a video like this? A lot of times I don't ask myself about the purpose of the things I do. I was just sitting here and I made the connection between the video that I did with the man talking about how God is not dead, he is alive, with this book, and then this book. Because this book, I think its subtitle is a radical translation of the Old Testament. But, you know, that's just from memory. Yeah, no, a radical interpretation of the Old Testament and its tradition is like the subtitle to You Shall Be As Gods. Now, he wrote this book kind of late in his career. Where's the copyright page? Do you care about the copyright page? I'm not sure you do. Probably looking at this. Shame on you. It's like people, it's just a natural, we're just vessels. You know, I can't help it that I got problems with shirts. Me and shirts are enemies. Mortal enemies. And let's see when this was written. He was a very busy boy. This was written in 1966. Escape from Freedom, his first and considered his most important work, was written in 1941. That is a span of 25 years. And considering how methodical this guy was in his research and his writing, between that time, 1941, he wrote The Forgotten Language, The Heart of Man, Man for Himself, Marx's Concept of Man, May Man Prevail, Psychoanalysis and Religion, The Sane Society, Sigmund Freud's Mission, Beyond the Chains of Illusion, Zen Buddhism and Psychoanalysis, with D.T. Suzuki and R.D. Martino, and Humanist Socialism. So yeah, that's like, what, about a dozen books? And that's pretty prolific for a guy who writes these kind of books. You know, this isn't writing a novel where you're just checking the right, you got, especially nowadays, you got the internet, you just check the right caliber of the gun and check your facts so instantly. This is a whole nother ball game, man. This is the accumulation of going to 3 different colleges, and this is a methodical writer who was very concerned with making himself understood and writing very complicated things in the simplest way possible. Now, for those of you who may not know, he uses the word anthropomorphic, which is a bit of a long word. Anthro meaning man, morph meaning form. Mickey Mouse is an anthropomorphic character because he is a mouse with human characteristics added to it. So when we talk about making an anthropomorphic god, that means you take a god and you write and you make human characteristics or attach human characteristics to him and make him human, like we make a mouse into Mickey, talking and speaking and dancing and whatever else people do. So, and part of what I read, he said, anthropomorphic elements have not disappeared. God speaks, talks, like we do. He dwells places, like on a mountain. He isn't everywhere. He's dwelling on a mountain. And that's where Moses goes up and meets him. What is it, Mount Ararat? Or is that where the ark? I'm screwing myself up now. What is the name of the mountain? Sinai. I think Mount Sinai. And he writes things on tablets, though. In that movie, the finger of God is, I think, lightning. But anyways, yeah. And that is why you get all this jibber jabber about God. And it's all so destructive and divisive because we're all different people. We all have different fingers that point at the moon. And we all perceive things in a different way. And to me at least, God is an experience that you have that changes your life. That's what God is. That's why I don't talk and say God this, or make positive statements about God. There's theories behind that, but, you know, that I could throw at you, but why? You know, probably wouldn't do a good job of it anyway. Yeah, I get feelings sometimes when I look at this Bible. I think about that poor woman and what she went through. And I don't know when this particular Bible came into being. It seems ancient. It's falling apart. I mean, there's like pages like this in it. And it's got, you know, to make the Bible's so long to make it like where you can handle it, the pages got to be tissue thin anyway. And I read through the whole thing, of course. I didn't use highlighters. I would just like take a pen, and my priest would have shot me for this. Cover up the nipples there. The priest would have shot me for this, but I went ahead. Man, it's just a tool to learn with. It's just a book, so I went ahead and wrote in it. And that was before I met this Jehovah Witness guy. He said that I asked him about writing in Bibles and stuff like that, and he goes, by all means, write in the Bible, mark things down, make notes, use highlighters, whatever you got to do. Just make sure it's our Bible, because they got Jehovah Witness. I got a Jehovah Witness Bible around here somewhere, but they got their own Bible that supports their own interpretation of it. That you know, is a ring that goes around their own finger and fits rather nicely. So, but yeah, I said in that video that I made with references to Popeye in it, I am what I am, that I would go dig out this book and do this video, and it just so happens that I can match it up with the chrysalids video. And of course, very few people will watch it. I will try using an incendiary title. I'm going to try Christians and Jews do not even know the name of their own God, because nobody does. All we have is that those 4 letters, YHWH, because they were superstitious about, you know, breaking that commandment. And they, you know, as it was explained in that book, that they did not, you know, they used Adonai, my Lord, and they wouldn't even say that unless they were in prayer. So it has to do with the nature of the Hebrew language and how it has to be kept alive through speaking. So all we have is those 4 consonants, and they're called the boy, I can talk really good today, can I? The ʻtetrəʻɡramə‌tän. I hope that's right. Tetra meaning 4, and gramma, you know, the root of, meaning words, or, you know, something to do with words. I don't know. I'm aggravated. I'm aggravated with myself. That's a great way to end the video, with aggravation. But I don't feel my best. Yeah. But yeah, I spent, ever since I had my, ever since my teens, I've been interested in this sort of thing. I've been especially interested ever since I was 20 years old and had what I call my moment underneath the Bodhi tree, because supposedly that is where Gautama the Buddha had got enlightened, was sitting underneath a Bodhi tree. Bodhi. I think it's pronounced Bodhi. I don't know. What the hell? I've been in school like 7 years. I'm supposed to know these things. got a 9.5 grade education, and missed so much school, as much school as humanly possible. And the times that I was in school, I was looking at chickens outside the window. A reference to my chicken story, where I was like looking out the window and I saw a chicken running around outside, and I tapped the guy in front of me, and I thought I was losing my mind, and I'm like, hey man, look outside. What do you see? You see a chicken? I didn't drop acid and go to school like my younger brother, so I never took acid in my life. So he was like, what the fuck is a chicken? And then he got around the classroom, and finally the teacher realized nobody was paying attention to him and looking out the window. He's like, what's out the window? And then somebody said, it's a chicken. And everybody got up, stood around the window, and looked at a chicken. Now, this is not in a rural area. This is just a bright white big-ass chicken that got loose from somewhere and was walking across this field. This is by no means inner city, more cement than grass type of situation. But it is also wasn't some country farmhouse school, out in the wood, out in the boonies either. It was, I think I can tell you that, it was in Perry High School off of Genoa Road. And I believe that's in Canton, Ohio. But I like the way that all fit together with the part of the chrysalids. So I'm just going to attach this to that video. And, it fits perfectly with it. So you have the same message in poetic form, in a novel, in fiction, and you have it in prose. You have it out of a textbook, more or less. I would call that a textbook. And then, like I showed you in the Bible, that what this guy is talking about matches up with the New American Standard translation of the Bible into English, which is considered the most accurate translation of the Bible in the 20th century. I don't know if they made it any more accurate Bibles than these, but this was always referred to as the most accurate translation of the Bible. But anyways, and that is why whenever somebody talks about God, I mostly listen. It tells me more about them. And when I used to do my 10-year study of people, of atheists, both atheists, agnostics, and believers, theists, whatever you want to call them, when I would talk to all of them, I would listen to them talk about God. And I learned, I would say, absolutely nothing about God, but I learned a whole lot about people. And at one point, I felt like it all had become superfluous, so I stopped doing it. Because I was like, I've learned as much as I can learn. It's like, it's time to move on and waste my life on something else. Because I realized that, first of all, supposedly one of the last words that the Buddha said was, search for the truth within yourself and follow no one. Which is as ironic a statement as using the name I am. I exist. It's not a name. It's just a statement of fact. Your name can't be I am, And the name of, just like the name of God, is not God. That would be like me going up to you and saying, how you doing? My name is man. There's many gods, But that statement that the Buddha made about supposedly his dying words, he died supposedly at the age of 80, were search for the truth within yourself heeding or listening to no one else. In other words, he's telling you something that's basically, don't listen to me. He's telling you to search for the truth within yourself. Don't listen to me. Which is just as ironic as using the name I am. I exist. A fact that in a correlation that I find quite interesting. And I also find it interesting that these two huge the train comeback. I deliberately waited to do this part to avoid that train. But the train come back. I don't know what that means, but you're not supposed to attach significance to such events. Maybe the engineer had to stop the train and take a very long piss. I don't know how trains work, but this is highly unusual for around here. But now I forgot what the hell I was saying because I didn't want to talk over top of the train. Somehow the train seems quite deafening to me. How it will sound to you, I don't know. But the last thing I was going to say or note was that this idea of representing God through words and symbols that come from men and come from men's minds as being a bad thing. Neither Jesus nor the Buddha wrote down any of their teaching.